Did the founders of Christianity lie? Did its most revered saints and theologians advocate for deception to win converts and build their religion? The short answer? Absolutely. Hey everyone, Farid here, and welcome back to The Rational Farid. Today we are tearing down one of the most fundamental, deeply ingrained myths about Christianity. The idea that it is and always has been based on an unwavering commitment to truth. We've all been told that faith requires belief in absolute truth, that honesty is paramount. But what if I told you that from its very foundations, the architects of the Christian faith didn't just accept deception, they championed it? And I want to be crystal clear. This isn't my interpretation. This isn't some angry critic's hot take. The evidence we're looking at today comes directly from the horse's mouth. The words of Christianity's own revered saints, its most influential popes, and its foundational theologians. They straight up wrote about the necessity of lying. They called it good management, a youthful medicine, and even confessed to using it. So if you're ready to move past the sales pitch and look at the historical records, you're in the right place. Today, we expose the strategy of lying for God. This isn't just about questioning faith. It's about holding a global institution accountable to its own history. Are you ready for this? Let's dive in. All right, so I claim that the leaders of the church admitted to using deception. That's a heavy charge, so let's not waste any time. Let's look at the receipts. And we'll start with a man whose work is literally the bedrock of Western Christianity. Meet Saint Jerome. This is the scholar who translated most of the Bible into Latin, the version used by the church for over 1,000 years. You'd expect the man obsessed with God's word to be obsessed with truth, right? Well, here's what he had to say about dealing with an audience. And I quote, "There is nothing so easy as by sheer volubility to deceive a common crowd or an uneducated congregation." Think about that for a second. That doesn't sound like a warning against deception. That sounds like an observation from someone who understands the technique. It sounds like a strategy. But don't worry, it gets far more explicit. Let's move on to Bishop Eusebius, who was basically the official court historian and propagandist for Emperor Constantine, the man who turned Christianity into an imperial power. Eusebius was so committed to youthful truth that he wrote a chapter in one of his works with the title that you genuinely could not make up. It was titled, "How It May Be Lawful and Fitting to Use Falsehood as a Medicine and for the Benefit of Those Who Want to Be Deceived." He literally wrote a how-to guide for lying to people for their own good. And just in case you thought that was a one-off, in his actual history of the church, he openly admits his editorial policy. "We shall introduce in this history in general only those events which may be useful first to ourselves and afterwards to posterity." This isn't just cherry-picking, folks. This is a public declaration that he is crafting a propaganda narrative, not a historical record. But maybe that was just Eusebius, right? Wrong. Let's talk to John Chrysostom, a man so revered for his public speaking that they nicknamed him Golden Mouth. He asked quite plainly, "Do you see the advantage of deceit?" He then goes on to explain that it shouldn't really be called deceit, but rather a kind of good management, cleverness, and skill. He even drives it home by stating often it is necessary to deceive and to do the greatest benefits by means of this device. So, according to the Golden Mouth, lying isn't just okay sometimes. It's necessary. It's a beneficial skill. It's a core part of their toolkit. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Farid, that's all ancient history. The rot was cut out during the Reformation. Well, let's ask the father of the Reformation himself, Martin Luther. In a private letter, he mused about a hypothetical situation and concluded this: "What harm would it do if a man told a good, strong lie for the good and for the Christian church? A lie out of necessity, a useful lie, a helpful lie. Such lies would not be against God. He would accept them." So there you have it. From the 4th century to the 16th, from the foundations of the Catholic Church to the birth of Protestantism, we see the same running theme. The philosophy of the end justifies the means applied directly to what they claimed was divine, unchanging truth. These weren't admissions extracted under torture. This was their philosophy in their own words.
So, we've established that the church's most celebrated minds gave the green light to using deception. This wasn't just a philosophy, it was a license to operate. The next logical question is, how did they actually do it? What were the tools in their toolkit for crafting this grand narrative? It turns out they had a few go-to techniques, a kind of copy and glorify playbook. Let's break down the top 3. First up, the most brazen trick in the book: false accreditation. Why struggle to build a reputation for your new text when you can just slap a famous name on it? The vast majority of books in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament are forgeries in this sense. They were written anonymously and then attributed to revered figures like Moses, Peter, or Paul to give them instant, unearned authority. It's like writing a self-help book today and publishing it by Plato to make it sound profound. And this blends right into inventing dialogue. They love to write entire speeches, long, elaborate theological monologues, and just put them into the mouths of their characters. A prime example, the Gospel of John chapters 13 through 17. It features a continuous 3,600-word speech supposedly delivered by Jesus to his disciples at the Last Supper. Let's be rational. That's not a display of miraculous recall from a fisherman decades later. That is pure, unadulterated fiction writing. Their second favorite tool was a clever bit of alchemy, turning allegories into literal history. They take an old story, which originally had a symbolic or moral point, and insist it was a factual event to be used as proof for their own new doctrines. Take the famous story of Jonah and the great fish. The original Hebrew tale wasn't about piscine digestive systems. It was a sophisticated allegory about God's universal compassion even for the hated enemies of Israel, the people of Nineveh. But centuries later, the anonymous author of Matthew's Gospel needed some Old Testament authority for his new idea that his Messiah could conquer death. So what does he do? He has his fictional Jesus character cite the Jonah story as if it literally happened, creating a prophecy where there was none. It's a classic case of later writers taking folk tales literally and repurposing them for their own theological agenda. Finally, we have a technique so audacious that one of our earlier architects of deceit, St. Jerome, named it himself. He called it taking passages captive. This is the art of ripping a quote completely out of its original context to make it say whatever you wanted to say. He described it as taking passages captive by your pen and pressed into service to win you a victory, which in volumes from which they are taken have no controversial bearing at all. It's the ancient equivalent of quoting a single line from a movie review, incredible, when the full line was an incredible waste of time. This wasn't scholarly work. As Jerome himself admits, this was rhetorical warfare, where the result was the only thing that justified the means. So, false names, invented speeches, repurposed allegories, and out-of-context quotes. This was the machinery of narrative creation. This is how you build a religion from the ground up when the facts aren't on your side. And with a toolkit like this, you can produce some truly astonishing fakes. Okay, so we have the motive, lying for God, and we have the methods. Now let's get to the main event, the forgeries themselves. Because the early church and its successors weren't just admitting to a philosophy of deception, they were practicing it systematically for centuries. This is the real copy and glorify section, and the assembly line was running hot. First up, a forgery so audacious it shaped the political map of Europe for centuries. The donation of Constantine. This was a document supposedly written by the first Christian emperor Constantine the Great in the 4th century. And what did it do? Not much. It just gave the Pope supreme authority over all other bishops and control of the city of Rome and the entire Western Roman Empire. It was the ultimate power grab, built on a lie. And don't take my word for it, the Catholic Encyclopedia itself today calls it, and I quote, without doubt, a forgery. Imagine signing over half of a continent with a fake deed. That's the level we're operating on here. But why stop there? Next up, the false decretals. This was an absolute avalanche of fake documents, over 100 counterfeit letters and decrees attributed to popes and councils from the very first centuries of the church. And their goal? You guessed it, to retroactively prove that the papacy had always held immense power and privilege. It's a clear pattern. If you don't have the authority, just forge the paperwork that says you do. And what about the holy grail of Christian apologetics? The so-called Testimonium Flavium. This is the infamous passing reference to Jesus in the works of the first-century Jewish historian Josephus. It's trotted out as the ultimate non-Christian proof for Jesus' existence. But here's the kicker. In an era where Christian zealots were torching entire libraries of pagan and Jewish antiquity, This one passage in this one book from a non-believer that just so happens to confirm their God-man miraculously survived. Most scholars today agree this passage was at best heavily, quote-unquote, doctored by a Christian scribe in the 4th century. And the prime suspect? Our old friend Eusebius, the guy who literally wrote the book on lying for a good cause. This wasn't preservation, it was a targeted act of historical manipulation. And let's not forget about the physical forgeries. The church's relic-making industry cranked out thousands of fakes to fleece the faithful. There were at least 26 authentic burial shrouds of Jesus floating around. So many splinters of the true cross that the reformer John Calvin noted there was enough wood to build a full load for a good ship. And their brilliant excuse when confronted with obvious duplicates? They claimed that self-replication was just another one of the relic's miraculous qualities. That's not just lying, that's peak intellectual dishonesty. And if you think this all stopped in the Middle Ages, think again. The story of Juan Diego and the miraculous image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which supposedly appeared on his cloak in 1531, the Pope canonized him a saint in 2002. But a modern art restorer, when actually examined the miraculous cloak, he stated plainly that the image was not a miracle. Instead, it had been painted on. A Cambridge professor called the whole story a religious work of fiction. The tradition of fabricating evidence is truly timeless.
Now, we've seen the power grabs and the phony relics. But for our grand finale of forgery, let's look at the absolute magnum opus of Christian fabrication. We're going to dissect how one of the central, most miraculous doctrines of the faith was manufactured from scratch: the virgin birth fraud. This isn't just a simple misinterpretation. This is a monstrous fiction, meticulously built layer by layer on linguistic deception and retroactive prophecy. To see how they did it, we have to go back to the source. It all begins with Isaiah 7:14 in the Hebrew Bible. The original text reads, Hine ha'alma hara ve'yelet ben ve'karat shem-o Immanuel. An honest translation of this is simple. Behold, the young woman has conceived, and bears a son, and calls his name Immanuel. The two crucial words here are alma, which means young woman, and hara, a past tense verb meaning has conceived. The actual Hebrew word for a virgin is betulah, but that word is nowhere to be found here. The context was a specific prophecy given to King Ahaz about a child who would be a sign for him in his lifetime. It had nothing to do with the Messiah centuries later. So where did the virgin come from? The first slip-up happened in the 3rd century BC, when Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek, creating the Septuagint. They translated the Hebrew alma into the Greek word parthenos. Now, parthenos can mean virgin, but it could also just mean a young unmarried woman. At the time, this ambiguity probably didn't matter. Fast forward a few hundred years. A Christian convert named Justin Martyr is trying to sell his new religion in a Roman world full of pagan cults that already had stories of gods born to virgin mothers. He needed to compete. Conveniently, he looks at his Greek copy of Isaiah, sees the word parthenos, and, shocker, declares that it was a prophecy about Mary being a virgin. But the final stroke of genius, or rather the final act of fraud, was committed by the anonymous Greek priest who forged the Gospel of Matthew. He wasn't content with just one linguistic slip-up. He took the Hebrew word hara, remember, the past tense verb meaning has conceived, and rewrote it in the future tense. He put it all together to create his brand new fulfilled prophecy. Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son. This wasn't the fulfillment of a prophecy. This was retroactive prophecy engineering. They took a mistaken translation of a noun and combined it with a deliberate mistranslation of a verb to create a miracle out of thin air, all to make their story sound more impressive. It is without a doubt their masterpiece of manipulation. So let's take a step back and look at what we've seen. What we've uncovered today isn't just a few isolated incidents of pious fraud or the actions of a few rogue priests. This is a consistent, documented, and admitted strategy employed by the very people who built Christianity. from the earliest church fathers who saw lying as a useful medicine, to the Reformation's architect who endorsed a good, strong lie for the church. The pattern is undeniable. When you look at the evidence in its totality, the admissions, the forger's toolkit, the catalog of fakes, the engineering of core doctrines, you arrive at a very stark conclusion. Whether we look at the Middle Ages and the Reformation, the first centuries of the Christian era, or even today, Christianity has always been a fabrication, layer set upon layer of lies and nonsense, a fraud from its very inception. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This is the very foundation of the building. And the most enduring part of this legacy is how it conditions the believer to accept it. It's a system where, as they see it, faith absolves the believer from any fidelity to objective truth. Think about this declaration from Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. He instructed his followers that, to be in harmony with the church, we should always be disposed to believe that which appears to us to be white is really black if the hierarchy of the church so decides. Read that again. Believe that white is black if the institution tells you to. That is the ultimate intellectual surrender. It's the end goal of a system that was from the beginning built on a foundation of strategic, beneficial, and necessary fabrication. The legacy isn't just the lies themselves, but the demand that you stop trusting your own eyes to believe them.
In the end, this journey through history isn't about tearing down someone's personal faith for the sake of it. Here on The Rational Farid, it's about one thing: holding all beliefs accountable to the evidence. It's about understanding history, not the sanitized version we're often sold. It's about questioning the narratives we're handed down, especially when they claim the authority of absolute truth. And it's important to remember, these criticisms are not new. We aren't the first to see these cracks in the foundation. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the brilliant Roman philosopher Celsus, one of the foremost thinkers of his age, looked at the burgeoning Christian movement and saw right through it. He wrote, "It is clear to me that the writings of the Christians are a lie, and that your fables are not well enough constructed to conceal this monstrous fiction." He saw it then, and the historical evidence makes it impossible for us to unsee it now. If you found this deep dive into the history of lying for God insightful, and if you believe in the importance of questioning, then do me a favor and hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to The Rational Farid so you don't miss our future investigations, and please share this video with someone you think needs to see it. I really want to know your thoughts, so drop a comment below. Did any of these forgeries or admissions surprise you? Which piece of evidence stood out the most? Let's discuss it. Thank you for joining me today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and as always, stay rational.